To the Point with Michael Williams.
The locks are open again. The water from Lake Okeechobee is pouring into the St. Lucie River and then onto the estuary and Indian River Lagoon again. Are we looking at another year of toxic water on our Treasure Coast? Good morning. Fears are growing that we could be facing another spring and summer of toxic water on the Treasure Coast. The problem begins, of course, at Lake Okeechobee. When the water gets too high, it threatens to break through dikes built in the Herbert Hoover area, the depression. To ease the pressure, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers releases water into the St. Lucie River and estuary, saying they have to do so because of concerns about that aging dike. But that means pollution and the potential to turn all of it into a toxic mess, toxic water on the Treasure Coast where the economy and environment so integrally intertwined. Joining me now to discuss all of this, two of the best experts on the lake, the Everglades, the estuary, the lagoon, Mark Perry, the Executive Director of the Florida Oceanographic Society, and Eric Eichenberg, the CEO of the Everglades Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming in. First, an overview from you, Eric, about the news and what we saw just on our screen and that our viewers at home saw, your concerns near, mid, and long term, and then Mark will have you give an overview as well.
Well, as Yogi Berra once said, it is deja vu all over again. And unfortunately, the news that came out of Jacksonville last week, where the Army Corps is beginning to release polluted water down the St. Lucie into the Indian River Lagoon, it is setting up the potential for that disaster again, that lost summer that we experienced in 2013. But let me give viewers hope who are watching today. There are solutions that are before us right now to solve this problem. It's before us. We need to have that political will to see it happen. All
right, and we'll tease you only a minute home because we want to jump into the potential solutions near, middle, and long term. And I know you've been talking about these for a long time and have helped in pushing that case. First, your overview, Mark. And let me point out, we're talking about 200 million gallons of water a day. That's about something we estimated 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools a day. Now, that's only about a fifth of what was happening in the summer of 2013, and yet it could continue. B, that amount of water could have to increase depending on what we see in our rainy season. So we're in a very dicey situation, as a lot of you on the Treasure Coast on edge. Your overview, then we'll jump into solutions.
Yeah, very briefly, that when the Corps gets to this point in the lake, they have certain limited management options, and they're currently engineered to dump it east and west to these coastal estuaries. And it's not as huge of a discharge as we had in 2013, obviously, but it's a continuous long-term discharge. It's going to drop the salinities in the estuary lower than the oysters and seagrass beds and other habitats realize it. And the problem is that just water alone, just that, it's about every day that you're dumping water out of the St. Lucie locks, it's about 32 days of water supply for the city of Stuart. So, I mean, it's a waste of fresh water that's going to the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico that should be going south to the Everglades and into the aquifers to recharge water supply to the south.
Less than 2013 by far for now, but still a significant impact. And for the uninitiated, and there aren't many, a lot of you on the Treasure Coast I've talked to very well versed on this topic, but you're talking about phosphorus, nitrogen runoff. There's a lot of finger pointing. People point to agriculture, to the ranches. They point to septic runoff and the like. But you're building the potential right now for the kind of algae blooms that come from that mix I just described that can create the kind of issues, in addition to salinity problems, that can be a brew that can really hammer us.
That's right. Actually, with that freshwater discharge from the lake comes the phosphorus and nitrogen, and particularly nitrogen is an issue with the estuaries and the coastal systems versus phosphorus with the lake and the Everglades.
Are we seeing environmental impact thus far with the amounts so far? The Army Corps hopes these lesser amounts, relatively speaking, will mean less impact. What are you seeing right now, if anything, with testing?
Right now, we're not seeing any algae. We're not getting any reports of those toxic algae blooms like we've seen in the past. But since 2004, we started seeing those algae blooms. That have been in relatively recent times, even though we've had larger discharges in the past.
Eric, I have had people at home waiting with bated breath long enough. You want to talk solutions, and you've been in the vanguard of that push. We have a giant plumbing system there, water flowing in from the north, the Kissimmee River Basin, into Lake Okeechobee, water flowing east and west when that dike becomes too full. The obvious hoped-for solution eventually is to let more cleaned water, _cleaned water, flow south, be filtered, flow in and restore the natural flow of the Florida Everglades. Sounds great. Funding that and the puzzle has been a dynamic, challenging puzzle. So as you look at that and that plumbing, what are solutions you're beginning to say are out there near term first, then we'll talk mid and long term?
Let me just start by saying that Yeah, this may not be 2013, but this is January.
Yeah.
We're in January, 5 months before the start of the rainy season. So the fact that releases are happening today is a troubling factor as we head towards June and the summer months. But the solutions are there, and the progress that's been made over the last couple of years to ensure that we're building the infrastructure to keep as much water on the peninsula as possible are seeing positive results. We've been pushing for a long time to see the Central Everglades Planning Project, CEP, be finalized so that Congress can take steps to authorize it. The Army Corps of Engineers, that's the infrastructure to move water south. The key to this, Michael, as Mark and other partners are pushing on these issues, it's to put as much water south to clean it. The Central Everglades project will allow that to happen. It now sits before Congress with the Republican majority in the Senate and the House getting back to regular order. We hope that Water Resources Development Act will be authorized this Congress so we can see CEP to start to be funded. But
and what kind of funding are we talking for that project?
We're talking about $1.5 billion, a 50-50 partnership. Remember, the Everglades restoration is a 50-50 share between the state and the federal government. So that is now moving in the pipeline. But the key also is when you take water from the lake and move it south, you have to store it. You have to have the ability to hold water south of the lake before it is sent into those man-made wetlands.
Does
those
Sugarland
filtration
play into that?
marshes. It does. There's an option on the table right now to buy land that is currently used for sugar farming, 26,000 acres directly south of Lake Okeechobee, that if purchased could be that land for storage, where projections show you can store a foot of lake water in that reservoir that would have to be built, send it south through the infrastructure that CEP will provide into those filtration marshes, those man-made wetlands, to where it can be cleaned and then sent into the Everglades. And at the southern end, Tamiami Trail, the bridges allow the water to go into Florida Bay.
Talking about lifting bridges, that man-made bridges that cut off the natural flow, lifting them so the water can move as a clean sheet south to the bay. And people say to you, and I want to ask you first and then you, Mark, the plan, everybody understands what the plan needs to do to move. You talked about hoped-for solutions, and we sit there. Where, though, fundamentally do we stand with funding and timing? Because the frustration I hear is people say, someone like you eloquently describes what the fixes are, so let's fix it. So where do we really, realistically, in this political environment, stand with moving forward with real money, real shovels in the ground?
There was a mandate that came out of the November election, Amendment 1. 75% of Florida voters said, you know what, we want to put dollars towards conservation and environmental purposes.
No new tax dollars, but tax dollars from other sources.
No tax increases.
Not old money, other money. From
as real estate change and transactions occur, those dollars are set aside. The amendment, the 75% that voters approved, it specified poignantly to be able to buy land south of Lake Okeechobee within that Everglades agricultural area. So the voters have spoken. The time now is to ensure that funding goes to make it a reality.
Mark, I hear you avidly, or I see you avidly nodding, and I know you want to speak out on this. Talk again about the same question. The solutions dovetail onto what Eric has said, and how we get from here to there. That's the frustration. We know what we need to do. We've been talking about it for decades. How do we now get there?
Well, we have been talking about it for a while. We have lots of projects that have started and are in the works, and parts of them will do this and parts will do that. But even in the Comprehensive Everglades Plan, there's not been that one project that will really stop those damaging discharges to the estuaries and send that water south. And so we've had to look at that very carefully and say, we needed land to do that, and the land came available now with these options, and especially with the passage of Amendment 1, now makes the funding for the state available to leverage that and purchase this land and move forward, and actually then the Corps has the ability to build projects and to store, treat, and convey that water south.
We also have a completely separate C-44 project, completely separate, somewhat east, as my geography reminds me, for another reservoir potential for the lake. Correct?
Yeah,
and that's on shovels. No, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll clarify that C-44 reservoir project is part of the Comprehensive Everglades Plan, but it's just for the basin in the C-44. It does not attenuate the flows from the Lake Okeechobee.
But Michael, let me just be very clear. You have to have a completed C-44 along the St. Lucie. You have to have a completed C-43 on the Caloosahatchee, and you have to have that reservoir, that EAA reservoir that's called upon.
The Everglades Agricultural Area, EAA.
That is called upon in that comprehensive plan that Bill Clinton signed 15 years ago, that Governor Bush had supported back then. It's there. It would provide water for agriculture, for sugar, as well as for the Everglades. We must We really must identify those acres. They're there, 26,000 directly south of the lake. The money, the capacity is there through Amendment 1. It's now the political will to make it happen. The governor has to step forward.
Okay, you're shaking your head. The governor's argued he's put considerable money towards the state side of beginning to fund these, and that we're seeing foot dragging in Congress. Do you think that's a fair estimation? Have we seen more aggressive efforts by this administration to begin to fund its share of what we've been talking about right here?
The governor, the last 3 years, has stepped up in a tremendous leadership role with the Tamiami Trail bridging, with putting the stormwater treatment area along the C-44, putting money towards that. Governor Scott, the restoration strategies, the ability to clean the water before it goes in the Everglades. He is making the progressive steps that have to happen. The next one is to ensure we have enough land south of the lake, because, Michael, this is all about storage. We're now 20 million
Storage and
people.
cleaning of that water. You store it and
You
clean
store
it
it, you
before
have to
it moves
clean
south.
it. We're now the third most populous state in the nation. California, Texas, Florida. As we continue to grow, we have to grow this water supply. We can't keep putting straws in the existing plant.
You raise a good point, Eric. For those who sit here and say, there's some who are ardent about protecting Florida and what's left of our natural heritage and the environment. But you raise an excellent point. We're talking about your drinking water and mine, because all of this water flowing out to sea is water that could be stored and is desperately needed and will be needed to help water come out of our taps in the year to come as our secondary major water supply, of course, the aquifers. But without Lake Okeechobee water refueling the aquifers that come out in your tap, we have a real water crisis. So if you care about nothing else, I hear you saying, care about the water coming out of your tap, and if we don't start storing what we're dumping, we've got bigger headaches ahead. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. And this land option that's before the state right now, expiring in October of this year, if there's a will to buy this land and ultimately build a reservoir, that begins to solve the problem we're talking about.
I want to ask you both, from the environmental perspective, and you've worn a number of hats in your current role as a fierce advocate for the Everglades, and also a political hat where you know the machinations and what it takes. So people are saying, sign me up on the Treasure Coast. How do I bend their ear and make them do it, short of marching with pitchforks to Tallahassee and Washington? How do we enable and get their attention in a more dynamic way to move the timetable and to bend the curve to get this done more quickly, Mark, from your perspective than yours, Eric?
Well, we all have on our websites Take Action, and you can go on there, Take Action, and we've got direct links to email the governor to let him know that we need the political will to go forward to buy the land that Eric's talking about. We also have connections directly to the legislature about those issues to say, here specifically it is. We do our job at educating the folks around our area, say, they get fired up. We're tired of these discharges. We don't want this devastation to happen to the estuary. How can we solve it? Now, the long-term thing sounds, oh, well, it's too far in the future. But you got to look on the return on investment. There is critical economic damage being done to the estuary, not just environmental. $840 million a year to St. Lucie, Martin County alone, and 27,000 jobs are directly affected by these discharges. So you're talking jobs in the economy, and if that wakes up some of these political leaders, that is a return on investment to stop that, create a better economy.
For our environment, our economy,
and
water out
supply.
of our tap.
Yeah.
The headline and the bottom line is the solutions are out there. I want your final thought, Eric, from that perspective on how we light more fires. But I do want to ask you parenthetically, Marco Rubio this week said he'd submit legislation to try and strip away authority from the Army Corps of Engineers and give it to the state on water outflows. Realistically, how likely is that? Bottom line quickly on that from both of you, and then a final thought from you, Eric.
Michael, it doesn't matter who regulates the lake. You have to have options.
Yeah.
The
If
state
there's nowhere to
controls
put the
it, or
water,
the
it
federal
doesn't
government. You still have the only option of dumping it east and west. We need to be able to have land to store water to the south.
And so your final thought, I've said you've worn, you wear the environmental hat as one of the chief advocates with people like Mark speaking to this. You've worn the political hat. What do we need to do to say, we're tired of waiting, we're tired of pushing the line back from 2013 to now? Where do we go, and how do you motivate people out there to be part of that?
Mark and I can talk about this all day, but until the business community steps forward, small businesses, people that are impacted, people's wallets that are impacted by this dirty water that we saw a couple years back, that last summer, they have to come together and rise up and say, let's find those solutions. Let's ensure that our leaders in Tallahassee hear these voices and they institute change. There's a business coalition that's forming, an environmental and business coalition. Support the EAAreservoir.com.
Say that again.
Support the EAAreservoir.com. It's a spot where businesses, conservationists, people who want to see these solutions are coming together to make their voices known, that this land option, the ability to buy land south of Lake Okeechobee, to store it, move it, clean it, send it to the Everglades. It's a protectant of our water supply. 8 million people rely on it, but most importantly, it will sustain our economy for generations to come.
Support the EAAreservoir.com. And again, to people, even if all of this came to fruition tomorrow, you're still talking years to build it out. But the longer you wait, the further you push this back, the bigger the headaches become.
That's right. But again, voters spoke in November. Amendment 1 is for 20 years.
And said do it now.
And do it now. So this generation, under the voters, what voters did, this generation can implement Amendment 1 on solutions like we're talking about today, so that we can then pass the torch to the next generation, so that they can carry on an Everglades that not only is restored, but then they will protect for generations to come.
We're going to keep on it as we have for the last several seasons. We always welcome your input, as I've been up on the Treasure Coast many times, and you all, I know, have made second homes there. No two more eloquent spokespeople than Mark Perry and Eric Eichenberg. We thank you for taking some time to join us. We're sure we'll have you back and be touching on this plenty, not only in the next few months, but as we move on. Thanks for taking time to be with us,
Thank
gentlemen.
you, Michael.
We appreciate it much. Coming up next, could we have a showdown in Florida between two of the state's biggest Republicans, the biggest? Coming up next.